What's up, guys? GP here, back with another episode of GP's Library, where I essentially just introduce a book to you guys, tell you when I read this book, give you my biggest takeaways of the book, and also lastly, who I think the book is for. And obviously all of this information is subjective, but I've been reading a good amount of books over the past few years, and I figure I may as well share some of them with you guys. So today I have a pretty thick book, actually. It's called Theft by Finding by David Sedaris, and it's actually his diaries from 1977 and 2002, and so 25 years worth. And he's a daily writer that obviously would not fit in a book this size, and so he's selective. He essentially, if you can see this, chooses some entries, and he'll just like write date, location, and then maybe not even a full like diary or journal entry, but at least what he thinks is interesting. And so yeah, that spans 1977 and 2002 in his life. And I read this May to June of this year. It actually took me a while to read. I mean, obviously you see it's a pretty big book, and it took me a few months to get through because I was also rotating it with this other book called How Google Works, which I'll eventually review. But let's get into my biggest takeaways. My biggest takeaway is that the best writing comes from living. So David Sedaris, in these diary entries, you can really see the living side of his life. So if you're a fan of his writing, he has a lot of books with his essays and stories in them and stuff like that. So you get used to seeing it in that more refined manner. But when it comes to these diaries, when it comes to these entries in books like this, it's a lot more vulnerable. It's how do I want to put this? It really just shows the side of him that's just like the day-to-day side, like, because when you're writing essays, you have something that you have an idea, you have something you want to write about, a specific idea you want to get across. But with this, it doesn't really have an objective. It's really just how he's living. And since this is 1977, 2002, at the end of the book, he's really just becoming successful. I think it's probably the last 4 years of diary entries is when he's becoming successful. So you really get to peel the curtain back and see those main things and turning points that he at least wrote about in here that kind of pushed him along to being the worldwide successful, multiple time New York Times, 10 times New York Times bestseller. I think it's more than that. But yeah, so that was a huge takeaway for me, is just through living and through doing all these different types of things, and through moving and through continuing to write while your own life evolves, you can really get so many good stories out of that, and so much stuff that you can't remember. Because I journal daily for the most part. I'll admit to you guys, I've missed the last 2 or 3 days, but I usually don't miss more than 1 day a week. So I probably journal 6 days a week. And even if I just go back and I read from 3 weeks ago, I'll read something that I completely forgot happened, much less if you're older and you have something that happened to you in 1977. It's so rare that you can remember those things, especially if you smoke or drink or you do stuff that could cause your memory to be a little hazy as well. It can be even tougher. And that leads me actually into my next point, which is that writing is evolutionary. You get to see the evolution of his journaling, the evolution of his life, and the evolution of his writing over 25 years in this book. And that's pretty powerful, in my opinion. That's something that I'm actually grateful that he put something like this out, because it shows the beginnings. It shows even how much money he was making before, the types of jobs he had before, the types of people he was hanging out with. And then as his life became more stable, as he became more successful, things like that, you saw his circle evolve. You saw who he was writing about evolve. And you see who stayed, which is mostly just his family. And so you see that evolution of a person. And I'm truly grateful that he was willing to open up into a lot of his personal writings to show us the evolution of his life. And then another takeaway for me is when I journal, like I said, I'm writing the time and location. A lot of times I would just write the date, But in the future, it is, I think about it like in the future, like when I'm 50 or even 40 or even when I'm 30, and I'm looking back and I'm like, damn, I was at 1 a.m. writing this. That's a whole different context than that there's no time. So at the top of mine, I write time, location. I travel a little bit. I mean, I've been on like 6 trips so far this year, and I write on all of them. And so it is interesting to know, okay, I was in Atlanta when I wrote this. I was in Wisconsin when I wrote this. I was in Wyoming when I wrote this. And then I was just in my normal mode, like in my Chicago office when I wrote this. Like, these are whole different. I even write couch. I'd be like, front Chicago couch at this time at midnight. Or back porch, because we have a back porch here at this time. So I try to be very specific with that, because I think that really adds to the context of what's being said. And I think it's going to be very valuable for the future when I come back and I'm reading through the time machines that are my, hopefully one day, 25 years of journal entries. And then my last biggest takeaway was patience. Like I said, as you see the evolution, like the book is kind of fast. You get through, not fast, but so the whole entire book is, how long? It's about like 550 pages. But the first half of the book is definitely a lot shorter, because he says even like through like drug addiction and issues, like a lot of the stuff he doesn't remember, and a lot of the writing is so jumbled from like the drugs and shit that he's like, I don't even want to like put you guys through that. So I what I'm trying to say is like the mid 90s to 2002 is like really like half the book, but you really get to see what all he had to go through and what all he went through. Not necessarily have to, but what all he did and went through, and how he kept writing through all that stuff, and how he kept evolving, like I said. But he stayed patient and he stayed creating. And so that's really my probably main takeaway. And that's why I call this book like one of the most, probably the most inspirational book I've read as an aspiring writer. And I've read his second set of diaries actually before I read this, just because I found those first at the bookstore. And once I got through this first set, and you really see him in his broke state, you really see him not having money, you really see him struggling, you really see him going through all the shit that young 20-year-olds go through. Because the second one is 2003 to, what does that say, 2020? And so he was rich. He was a multi-millionaire like most of those years. And so as it was cool to see him travel and do all around the world, he's in a new city like every night. He's traveling through Iceland, Ukraine, and all this other crazy shit. That's really cool. And I will review that book as well in the future, probably coming up here soon. But it's cooler to see him like kind of more like in the mud, like more the stage I guess I'm in right now, to where I'm not struggling. I don't have anything, like I'm not hitchhiking across America and shit like he does, but I'm definitely not to the success level that I plan on being at one day, and especially like with my writing. So it's just cool seeing that evolution and being like, it's okay, GB, just stay patient, you know? And so who's it for? Obviously, if you're reading David Sedaris, like, you like storytelling. That's what he is, he's a storyteller. So it's really the highest level of storytelling you could ever have, even if it's just a diary entry. Like, he's telling great stories as a diary. So if you like stories, perfect for you. Hyper-realistic writing, that's what I wrote here. I'm sure there's something actually, like, real that's, like, something like that. And this is almost done. But, like, an actual category of writing that's some like hyper-realism. I don't know, but it's hyper-realistic writing because it's happening like as it's going, and he really says a lot of it's not edited. He only edits out some names if he doesn't want to disclose who somebody else's identity is, or yeah, I think most of it, if he would edit it, he just wouldn't put it in the book if he didn't feel comfortable with it being out. And so that's something else. And then non-traditional writing. I showed you guys the pages. If you like something that's broken up a little bit different, because it is easier to read a lot of times in the full pages, because there's like a lot of times like paragraph or even like half paragraph breaks in each page that just makes the reading a little bit easier to digest. Even if it is 500 pages, it feels more like 300 pages of normal margin writing. So if that's something you like, or if you want to try something that's a little bit different, sometimes reading is boring for you in the normal sense, these type of books really show me that things can be whatever you want them to be in terms of creating a book. And also fans of progression. If you just like to see a dude progress over his life, over 25 years of his life, which is a long time. If you like stories like that in terms of movies, if you like stories like that in terms of books, there's no better version or example of that than this. I mean, David Sedaris he's probably my favorite author. He's a master of the craft of writing. So, Theft by Finding, if you want to be inspired as a writer, if you want to just read some funny or kind of crazy shit sometimes, if you just want to find something that's interesting, I really suggest this book to you. It's been another episode, guys. Go pick up a book. I'll see you guys next time.